What is going on, gunfighters? Welcome to Gunfighter Life, where we talk about guns, gun-adjacent stuff, the right way with Almighty God at the center. Exodus 15, the Lord is a man of war. Well, welcome to the podcast. Today, if you care about the goings-on of myself, I'm very humbled by that. Just got back from the East Coast, where I got to go to my sister's wedding. Don't like the East Coast, but I love my sister, so it works out. I also got to perform the wedding ceremony, which is a blessing. And there's a ton of people on the East Coast. I looked up the stats, and I think it was well over 1,000 people per square mile in her county. And there's 10 in my county where I live in. And I'm out in the middle of nowhere because that was too crowded for me. I got back and I just wanted to be alone in the wilderness. So I'm out on a spring bear hunt. Got really, really wet. No bear, but no bear yet. But super wet. A lot of fun, dirty. Spring bear hunting, though, is not the topic du jour. It's not the topic of the day. I wanted to talk to you guys about AR-15s. AR-15s, and are we spoiled? Have we just gotten lackadaisical? Do we take them for granted? That's kind of the scope of today's podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review. If you enjoy this podcast regularly, please consider becoming a patron. It means a lot. The $5 or whatever for you a month probably doesn't mean a ton, but it would mean a lot if it was sent to me. It does add up, and a laborer is worthy of his wages. So if this podcast helps you at all and you think it's worth some value, I'd appreciate it. I don't take a bunch of sponsors telling you to buy this new Chinese optic or, whatever else it is. This camo pattern is so hot this year. I don't do that. You shall take no bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of the righteous. So if you want to support the podcast, become a patron. And don't forget the other stuff like subscribe, leave a review. And let's get into AR-15s. It wasn't that long ago. I don't feel like I'm that old, guys. But it wasn't that long ago. I grew up in the assault weapons ban. You couldn't get an AR unless you got a pre-ban, which was an abomination. And if you did, it was a 10-round magazine. And if you did, for the average American, it was just ridiculously expensive for, blue-collar working people or poor rednecks like myself that grew up honestly poaching deer with like a single shotgun or an old bolt action shotgun 410. When you could get a SKS for just over $100. AR-15s were crazy expensive. It was like a Colt, and then later on maybe a Bushmaster, and then maybe Olympic Arms, one of the early ones, but really Colt was it for a while. And they're not cheap. You might not think they're cheap now, but adjusted for inflation, they're a lot more affordable than they were back in the day. And, during that era, not a lot of people wanted AR-15s. I think that really took off during the GWOT. And I'm saying this because I was part of the GWOT, so I didn't really see this because I was off fighting a war. But it kind of seemed like they were kind of like a special thing. Nobody really wanted ARs. And then I got back from the war and started settling in, and then ARs were everywhere. Kind of like cell phones or computers. Like there was a time when, you could get a personal computer, but it was prohibitively expensive. Or you could have, like, cell phones were like rich, wealthy people. They might have a car phone or like some giant box they carried. But in a pretty short amount of time, they became prolific so that everybody, not everybody, but most people had one. ARs kind of followed that similar path where, you might know a guy that had an AR. He was really into, like, that kind of genre, and he might have an AR. And then with the sunsetting of the assault weapons ban, and then people seeing the GWOT, the Global War on Terror, on the news year after year, and, how effective those weapons could be in the right hands, and then a bunch of companies, maybe that had something to do with the patent expiring or something, I don't know, but a bunch of companies just blossoming and coming out with AR-15s. there went from 1 to 3 to just exponential growth of AR-15 companies in America, and America really embracing the AR-15. And you started seeing the first of the Gucci calibers for AR-15s, like the 6.5 Grendel and the 6.8 SPC were some of the early ones. And they're still good ones, but you started seeing all kinds of stuff like this. When I went to war, it was an M16A2. There was no quad rail. There was no pick rail. That wasn't a standard thing in the military. When that came out and you were like, whoa, I can put an optic on an AR-15 or an M16 or an M4. Crazy. I can mount a PEC 2, or I can mount a flashlight for kicking down doors right on the end of my gun. Back when, the tactical cheese grater, the quad rail was all the rage. Now we've got M-Lock. There was a whole M-Lock key mod thing. But the point I'm trying to get at is that they exploded. And that was decades ago now. I think for decades, we have been spoiled with so many options and such a plethora of AR-15s and accessories that people have kind of gotten bored with it. And, maybe some people are getting into it and they gloss over it, or they think that somehow, it's less than. Now, let me be clear. I don't think that the AR-15 platform, the Stoner platform, whatever you want to call it, is the best rifle ever made. I don't think it's the best battle rifle ever made. I don't think a lot of things about it. I had a catastrophic malfunction with mine during the war. Catastrophic meaning like it could not be fixed in the field. So I am very aware that it has its shortcomings, but it is the de facto fighting rifle / carbine of our era. It has been the predominant fighting rifle for the last half of the 20th century, and now, the first quarter, can you believe it? The first quarter of the 21st century. It is the preeminent, the dominant fighting rifle of our day. For 75 years, just about. Not quite back to 1950, but, it was invented in the 50s. You think about that, back when the classic, 57 Chevys were out. It was invented in the 50s, adopted en masse by every branch of the armed forces in the 60s. And now we're in 2025. So for the last half of the 20th century and the first quarter of the 21st century, the go-to fighting rifle. There's been other stuff, sure. There's specialty roles for the, M21, or other things, the SCAR 17, which I love, but that is the rifle to beat. There was a time, a decade or 20 years ago, where you could argue that the AK-47 and stuff was maybe a better value, and you could get decent ones for $300. Those days are gone. That was not because those guns were cheap. It was because we kind of ended up on the right side of the Cold War, and there was a bunch of small Cold War countries that were trying to raise money and capital and selling off a bunch of their surplus stockpile stuff, and maybe sometimes just making, because they had the tooling, making stuff just for us, and we got a really good deal on those. Those days are gone. You go price a halfway decent AK-47 today, and price a halfway decent AR-15 today. I just saw that High Point is coming out with an AR-15. Now, say what you want about High Point. I'm not saying I'm going to rush out tomorrow and replace all my AR-15s with High Point AR-15s, but High Points are generally reliable, and I think the price point in this is under $500. We're talking about, in the year of our Lord 2025 money. Have you seen the price of eggs lately? That's a good deal. And, not just that, I was kicking around Cabela's recently, and I saw a used Smith & Wesson M&P AR-15, whatever they call theirs, whatever model it is, a basic model. Didn't look like it had been ridden hard and put away wet. It looked lightly used. It was $450 for an M&P, for a Smith & Wesson M&P. That's a good deal. So, and they're not the only ones, right? There's a bunch of good, affordable. This is not going to be a list of which ones to get. I've talked about that before, but there's a lot of really good value AR-15s. If you look at the budget AR-15s, the PSAs, the bottom basic Rugers and Smith & Wessons, those are crazy good values. The amount of firepower, and the history and the modularity you get for the money. If you look at mid-tier stuff, just crazy good values. And if you look at the higher end stuff, some of the, some AR-15s that would make the militaries look like junk. Like just really, really good AR-15s. I would consider like a mil-spec, although theirs are full auto, like a mil-spec FN or a Colt, they're mid to upper tier. You can certainly get really, really good custom high-end ARs, like a Wilson Combat, a high-end Daniel Defense, things like that, right? These are really good ARs. And there's nothing wrong with the mid-tier. They're probably your best value. But the point is there are so many. I think people kind of gloss over them. You see people going out and spending $1,200, $1,600 on a lever action 44 Magnum or 357 Magnum or 4570, and those are cool guns. They're not a battle rifle. They haven't been a battle rifle since the 1870s. They're a cool gun. They're a niche gun. If you want one and you've got the capital and you're not going into debt and you want one, rock on. Do that. But nobody is sending their frontline infantry troops into battle with lever action 4570s or 357 Magnums. They're not a battlefield rifle of the 21st century. The AR-15 is. And they're a quarter of the price, a third of the price, half the price for, the de facto fighting rifle of our day. They're really good value right now. So I'm not telling you not to have other stuff, but if you don't have a good AR-15, why? I think we may be in the times where people look back and think of this as the good old days of AR-15s. Kind of like we look back at the good old days of, when you could get a Mosin Nagant for under $100 and a Spam can of ammo for next to nothing. That's cool, but a Mosin Nagant's a cool historical rifle. It's not. I say again, it is not an AR-15. It's not. It's not going toe-to-toe with an AR-15. I don't care how cool you think they are. They're not a 21st century battle rifle. They're not an assault rifle. They're not a semi-automatic version of an assault rifle. They're a cool piece of history of, that kind of Cold War, curio and relic era. So these might be the good old days of the AR-15. Is ammo as cheap as it was 10 years ago? No, but we're talking about really good ammo. You can get real, and I would call like cheap ammo like the Tula, the Brown Bear, Silver Bear, whatever it is, like that's cheap ammo. I'm talking about like decent Winchester, decent Remington, decent, Lake City, good stuff like that. Really good stuff like that for decent prices. Again, is it as cheap as it was 10 years ago? No, but nothing really is because of inflation. Whatever they say inflation is, look at the price of eggs, look at the price of a bunch of other things, look at the price of housing. Adjusted for that, the ammo is really affordable and the guns are really affordable. So if we are, in fact, in the good old days, don't turn your nose up at them just because they're everywhere. Don't overlook them just because they're everywhere. Are they the only thing? No. Do I like SCARs? Yeah, I sure do. Do I like M14s? Yep, I think they're a great rifle. Do I like AK-47s? Yeah, but none of those are the value that a decent AR-15 is, right? If you could just go to your local gun store and buy a decent lower for very cheap, well under $100, maybe under half of that, and you can go on Palmetto State Armory. This is prices today in the year of our Lord 2025 in the month of April. Things could change. There could be a gun panic and those prices could quadruple overnight. But that's kind of what I'm saying. Get on it. But you could get a kit with pretty much everything other than the lower and maybe a rear sight for $300 and something. Are you kidding me? You know what that would have cost for a rifle like that in the 90s and the early 2000s? And we've got things today like nitride, which were like cutting edge then, but are common and affordable now. Nitride's a great coating. But that quality of rifle and I'm not saying that PSA is like the best AR-15 out there. It's not. It's a lower end AR that works pretty good. But for $300 and some bucks for a kit Are you kidding? That's fantastic. And they've got all kinds of kits, right? They got 20-inch kits if you want to go, Marine Corps, 20-inch rifle or nothing. Or you want to go shorter because you live east of the Mississippi in a people hive. And you want to go 12.5 or 11.5 inches, something shorter and handier for a truck gun. The amount of firepower, the power to weight ratio, there's a lot of really good options out there. You get a stainless steel barrel, get nitride. You can still get the hammer forged chrome line for very affordable. So, and a 1 in 7 twist, not that long ago, you'd be hard pressed to find a 1 in 7 twist. That's kind of the standard now. So what I'm saying is, don't overlook something because it's common, because it's kind of the vanilla. They're kind of the standard for a reason. And because of economy of scale, because there are so many companies, because the market's kind of flooded, it's a really good time. So if you don't already have one or two or a couple of really good ARs, a good 16-inch M4 carbine, M4gery kind of carbine, now's a really good time. The prices on them are good. So if something else is better for your situation, then do that and do it based on logic. But I think if you're an American, unless you're French or Canadian or something, why do you not have an AR-15? Even if you want something else as your day-to-day truck gun or something like that, I get it. But you should probably have a good AR-15 if you're an American. So just think about that. The values right now are crazy good. And maybe they'll get better, maybe they won't. But in my lifetime, I think these are kind of the good old days of the AR-15. So just because we've been spoiled for so long, don't take that for granted. With that, your tactical verse of the day. God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourself, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, casting all your cares upon him, because he cares for you. Be sober, be vigilant, for your adversary the devil prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Resist him, steadfast in the faith.